Welcome to Lesson 23 in Through the New Testament in Ancient Greek for absolute beginners. My name is Helene Iste, and I'm your guide as we read through the New Testament in its original, beautiful language, the language of ancient Greece, which coincidentally was called Helleniste. Because each lesson builds on previous lessons, be sure to start with Lesson 1. And please don't forget to like this video and to subscribe to my channel if you feel so led. In today's lesson, we'll be reading through Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 15, which covers the 12 apostles and the ministry of the 12. Our topics will be a review of πᾶσα πᾶν, which means every or all, a review of first and second declension nouns, an introduction to third declension nouns, a review of infinitive forms, but going into much more detail about how you form them, especially the present and aorist tenses, and then also imperative forms, the present and aorist tenses. Finally, we'll finish with a review of personal pronouns and demonstrative pronouns. Let's get started. Kai proskalasemenas tous dodeka mathetas autou, Edoken autois exousian pneumaton akatharton, hoste ekbalein auta kai therapuein πᾶσαν nasan kai πᾶσαν malakian. So first, let's point out these two occurrences of πᾶσαν, which both are accusative feminine singular. So over here, we'll find it right in this middle of the chart. So I am going to point out how you pronounce all of these forms for the sake of review. And then you'll also start recognizing this more because it's a pretty common word in the New Testament. So let's go ahead and read these. We have πᾶς, πᾶσα, πᾶν, πόνtos, πάσες, πόνtos, πόνti, πάσαι, πόνti, πόντα, πᾶσαν, πᾶν, πόντες, πάσαι, πόντα, πόντον, πάσον, πόντον, πάσιν, πάσας, πάσιν, πόνtos, πάσας, πόντα. Now, just to make sure everyone has this drilled in to their heads, we see the same forms in the genitive, masculine and neuter, and genitive, masculine, and neuter, plural. And the same forms for the masculine and neuter dative singular and dative and neuter plural, masculine and neuter. And then we also know that neuter nouns have the same forms in the nominative and accusative, whether it's the subject or direct object, they'll look the same. You have to know from context. Also in the plural, nominative plural neuter and accusative neuter plural are the same form as well. All right, so I want to focus in on these two nouns, which are mathetas and exousian. So first, let's look at exousian. This is a feminine noun of the first declension, and it's an alpha pattern noun. So usually it's going to be the feminine nouns that have a stem that ends in iota or rho. Here we have iota as the end of the stem. So just like cardia. So we learned the heart when we talked about first declension alpha pattern. So let me just review this with you. Hey, cardia is the heart. By the way, you can tell using this definite article whether that's feminine, masculine, or neuter. We know it's feminine because hey is a feminine definite article. So hey, cardia, tes cardias, te cardia, tain cardian. Hi cardiae, tone cardione, tais cardiais, tas cardias. And notice this form, the accusative plural, is the same as the genitive singular. So you would have to tell from context which meaning it had, which function it played in the sentence. Now, as long as we're on feminine first declension nouns, let's talk about the eta pattern. So you either have the alpha pattern, which starts with iota, the stem ends with iota or rho, and then all other feminine nouns will fall into this eta pattern. So here we have he kline. He kline means the bed. Tes klines. Te kline. Tain klinein. Hi klinai. Ton klinon. Tais klinais. Tas klinas. All right, so those are our first declension nouns. Now we have our second declension nouns, which are either masculine or neuter, generally. So we have ha huios. We know from ha that this is masculine. Tu huiu, which is the same article for both masculine and neuter, so you can't really tell from that genitive article whether it's masculine or neuter. But tu huiu, at least it's no, you know it's not feminine. To huio, which is also the same for the neuter. Ton huion. Hoi huioi. Ton huion. Tois huiois. Tus huius. So genitive and dative articles will match the genitive and dative articles of neuter nouns. Masculine and neuter are the same, which is similar to the pattern we saw in the previous slide. What differs are the nominative. Generally, you'll see os as the ending for the second declension masculine and on as the ending for the second declension neuter. You'll see oi for the plural nominative masculine, and you'll see a for the nominative plural neuter. And then you'll also see on, which will match your accusative because these guys are going to be the same for both masculine and neuter. And you'll see us for masculine plural accusative, but a, which matches your nominative, for the neuter. Right? So those patterns, you'll start seeing a lot more of those as we read, and it'll become much more familiar. All right, so let's read ploion, which means boat. Ta ploion. Tu ploiu. To ploio. Ta ploion. Ta ploia. Notice this ta and this ta sound very similar, so just hearing it you wouldn't know. But ploion is the accusative singular. Ploia will be your nominative plural. Ton ploion. Tois ploiois. Ta ploia. Again, neuter is the same in the nominative and accusative. All right, now let's look at this interesting word, which is masculine, but has this alpha in the ending. Now, you would think that disciples here was feminine, but it's actually a masculine noun that's used for both men and women. Does not mean that only men can be disciples of Jesus, but in this case, they are men. His 12 disciples are men. But this is a masculine noun. Now, the singular nominative is ha mathetes. Ha mathetes. So it looks a little bit more like this eta pattern, first declension, which is generally just feminine nouns. But ha mathetes is an irregular masculine first declension noun. So some first declension nouns are actually masculine. There are exceptions to the rule that it's always feminine. Another example is ha prophetes. Ha prophetes, the prophet, has the same forms as ha mathetes. Tu mathetu, to mathete, ton mathetain. So these endings, a and ain, are exactly like the endings in your feminine eta pattern nouns. Then we have hoi mathetai, which is also the same as the feminine. Ton matheton, which is also the same. Tois, notice it's tois, not tais, though. That's how you can tell it's masculine. Tois mathetais, and tus mathetas. We actually have the tus here and mathetas. So this is our accusative masculine plural. All right. And you'll see with prophetes, prophet, it is the same form. So those will get much more recognizable as you get more familiar. All right, also in Matthew 10:1, let's point out these two verb forms, ekbalein and therapuein. Ekbalein means to cast out or to throw out, and notice it ends with the epsilon iota nu. And over here we have therapuein, also ends with the epsilon iota nu. That is the ending for your infinitive in the present tense active voice. The translation is, in this case, luein, to loose or to be loosing. So ekbalen can mean to be throwing out, or to throw out, or to cast out. Or to heal, to be healing. More in this case, so as they will cast out and heal every disease and sickness. It's more like to cast out. You wouldn't be using this present participle to be casting out. So if this was a middle or passive form, to be loosed is an example, the ending would be esthai, lou esthai. And if it was middle only, a verb that used only the middle form, like a verb of motion, a verb of reciprocation, or something you do to yourself, then it's also esthai. Por you esthai is to go or to be going. Por you esthai. And then we have also an aorist tense form for your infinitive. And we won't go into detail about why you would use present infinitive versus the aorist infinitive, but there are situations where it's much more normal for the ancient Greeks to use present infinitives versus the aorist infinitives, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with time. So we'll go into that in more detail in the future. Right now, we're still at the beginning of your learning how to use these infinitives, so that's a lesson for the future. But let's just read the aorist tense infinitive. Active is lusai. So instead of luein, you have lusai. The middle is lusasthai. So we add a sigma and we change the epsilon to an alpha. And I always remember that you see this alpha most often with the aorist tense. So lusasthai, to loose oneself. So now we have a passive form, luthenai. So there's a form for the middle and a form for the passive. So instead of lusai, you become luthenai. So you add this thane in the middle, replaces the sigma. Luthenai is to be loosed. Lusasthai is to loose oneself. Luthenai is to be loosed. All right, and then over here we have middle only middle form, por you sasthai. So notice it's similar, esthai, but you add the sigma and change the epsilon to an alpha. Por you sasthai. And then with the middle only passive form, it's por you thenai. So these are actually interchangeable. They both mean to go. Por you sasthai, por you thenai. And it really is up to, whether you want it to sound a certain way. The author might choose one or the other. I wanted to point out here that all of these infinitives end with I. But this one, which is probably going to be the most common one you see, the present active infinitive ends with ein. So when you see ein or I, it could be something else, but it might be an infinitive. All right, so ekbalen is our example, to cast out, and therapuein, to heal. Let's go ahead and read Matthew chapter 10, verses 2 through 4. Ton de dodica apostolon ta anamata estin tauta, protas Simon, ha legamenos Petras, kai Andreas, ha Adelphas autou, kai Jacobas, ha tu Zebediou, kai Ioannes, ha Adelphas autou, Philippas, kai Bartholomeas, Thomas, kai Matthias, ha Telones, Jacobas, ha tu Alphaiou, kai Thaddeus, Sibon, ha Cananias, kai Judas, ha Iscariotes, ha kai paradous auton. Let's talk about third declension nouns. We've already seen a quick review of first declension nouns, which for the most part are feminine, with a few exceptions like mathetes and prophetes. And we see another one here, a first declension irregular masculine, telones, for tax collector. Iscariotes is another example of a masculine noun that fits into the eta pattern of the first declension. We've also seen second declensions nouns like huios and ploion, and how those are very similar in their declensions. And now let's take a look at third declension. So there's only 3 declensions, and the third declension is kind of like a junk drawer with all sorts of random nouns. All of the genders are represented, so there's not just neuter. I have neuter examples on this page, but we also have masculine and feminine third declension nouns. Here we have some examples of neuter third declension nouns, and one of them is right here in our text, the names, ta anamata. So ta anamata, you can recognize the nom is like nomenclature. That's very similar to words in English. So the names, nominative, neuter, plural, we see it over here. So I'll go ahead and read these. The nominative singular is generally the one that's a little different than what you would see for other nouns, but they all have very similar endings. It just depends a little bit on the stem, how the endings will change. So for example, with anima, you have anamatas, and then anamati, and then anima again, because it's neuter, so these match. And then we have ta anamata, which matches the accusative ta anamata. And then tone, anamatone, tois, anamasin. Very similar is the word for spirit, which is ta pneuma. So we have that, for example, when we talk about pneumatics, usually something to do with the wind, because it also means the wind. So ta pneuma, the spirit or the wind. Of the spirit or of the wind is tu pneumatos, very similar to anamatas. To pneumati, ta pneuma. And then again we have ta pneumata, very similar to anamata. Tone pneumone. Now there should only be an accent on this last syllable, own, because that's a long vowel. So this one should have been taken away. So I'm sorry, that's an error. And then we have tois pneumasin, very similar to tois anamasin. And then we have ta pneumata. So these anima and pneuma are very similar. Now we have some that are a little different, although soma is also very similar, but let's take a look at soma first because it is similar to the others. So ta soma means the body, and here we get the words like somatic. Psychosomatic means something to do with your psyche as well as your body, so soma. Tu somatas, to somati, ta soma. And then we have ta somata, tone somatone, tois somasin, ta somata. So you can see these endings on ta anima, ta pneuma, and ta soma are very similar. Here we have a little bit of a difference. You don't have the a in it because it is after the omega. So ta phos would be the light, and that makes sense. We have photo that comes from this original Greek word. Ta phos is the nominative, tu photos, to photi, ta phos again for the accusative. Ta phota, tone photone, tois phosin, ta phota. All right, so these are just a few neuter third declension nouns, and we'll see some in the next slide as well. But again, we have an interesting irregular masculine that falls into the eta pattern first declension here, telones, ha telones. And Judas, the Iscariot, is ha Iscariotes, another nominative masculine singular that has that eta first declension pattern. All right, let's go ahead and read the Ministry of the 12, so verses 5 and 6. Tutus tus dodeka apestelen ha Jesus, parangelas autois, legon, eis hadan ethnon, me apelthete, kai eis palin samariton, me eis elthete, por uesthe de malan pros ta prabata ta apololata oiku Israel. All right, so here are some more third declension nouns. Let's talk about this one, ethnon, of the Gentiles. So in English we call them Gentiles. That just means they're not Jews. So the way that they were called in ancient Greek is the peoples, of the peoples. So basically there were Jews and then there were other peoples. So ethnos generally can mean either Gentile or people or cultures. So ta ethnos, tu ethnus, to ethne, ta ethnos. Ta ethne, ton ethnon, tois ethnois, ta ethne. So our form here is the genitive neuter plural of the Gentiles. So Jesus sent forth the 12, having instructed them, saying, do not go off onto the way of the Gentiles. So in other words, don't go to the Gentiles and into the city of the Samaritans. So the Samaritans were also Gentiles. It's kind of a subcategory of Gentiles, but specifically they lived in Samaria. So, but instead, go to the lost sheep of Israel. All right, so Jesus instructs his disciples first to go to the Jews, and later they'll go to the Gentiles. All right, so let's look at this third declension noun here, pollen. Any city. So here, any city, because it doesn't use the definite article, it's translated any city. Just go to the cities of the Samaritans. All right. This is from the feminine third declension noun, polis. All right, so we have he, polis, tes, poleos, te, pole, tain, pollen. High, poles, tone, poleon, tais, polison, tas, poles. All right, so here is into any city. Remember, after ace is going to be accusative. Ace in the hole. I always remember the A for ace in the hole would be accusative. So into any city, ace, pollen. All right, and then finally we have probata, which is sheep. All right, so let's look at probata follows the same forms as anima. So let's repeat what we learned about anima. Ta anima, tu anamatas, to anamati, ta anima. Ta anamata, and that's going to be the same for the accusative, which is what we see here, probata. Ton anamaton, tois anamasin, ta anamata. So here we have ta probata. All right, let's go ahead and read Matthew chapter 10, verses 7 through 10. Por you amenoi de kerusete legantes hati engiken he basileia ton uranon asthenuntas therapuete necrus egeirete leprus katharizete daimania ekbalete, dorean elabete, dorean date, me keteses the crusan, mede arguran, mede kalkan, eis tas zonas humon, me peiran eis hadan, mede dua kitonas, mede hypodemata, mede rabdan, axias gar ha ergates tes trophes autu. So let's talk more about the imperative mood. First, the present tense. And we have 4 examples in these verses of the present tense. All of them are actually second person plural. So we have verbs that are present tense, imperative mood, active voice, second person, plural. Our first is therapuete, which comes from the verb therapuo, meaning to serve or to cure. We get therapeutics from this, or therapy. Therapuete is our second person plural, which actually matches our second person plural for the indicative mood. So you heal, meaning that's what you do for a living, you heal, is the same as heal as a command. Jesus is clearly using a command to his disciples now. Heal those who are ailing. So that's our imperative mood, even though it's exactly the same form as what you would see for the present indicative. All right, and then here we have egeirete, which is from the verb egeiro, which means to waken or to raise up. This is the verb used for Jesus being raised from the dead, for example. So egeirete is our second person plural, present imperative active. And then cleanse leopards, katharizete. And this, we get cathartic from this word. Katharizo is the word. It means I cleanse, I make clean, spiritually or ceremonially. So that's the same exact form, katharizete. And then finally we have the verb ekbalo, which means I throw, cast out, put out, banish, bring forth, produce. Ekbalete daimonia, so cast out demons. So these are all imperative commands. Let's go into a little more detail about, we saw only this one box here, the luete, but let's see all of the different forms. Now, if you're only talking to one person in front of you, so it's a second person singular, you would say lue or ekbale. So that person would just know that it's just a command, because that would be ekbales if it was indicative mode. And then if you're talking about somebody that's not with you right there, but you want that person to do something, like for example, let's say you're telling your friend that you want to go have your friend tell his mom to loose the horse. So you would just say, let her loose the horse, lueto. And then this is pretty understandable because we've seen examples already. You all loose would be luete. And then if you want to tell somebody to go, that's other people that aren't directly in front of you, loose the horses, then you would say luetosan. So, or let the jailers loose the prisoners. So you're talking about the jailers, luetosan. That would be third person plural. Now, if you're talking directly to someone and it's a middle or a passive meaning, like loose yourself or be loosed, you could talk to the prisoner and just say, be loosed, lu'u. Now, if you're talking to somebody about somebody else that you want to be loosed, like let's say you're talking to the jailer and you're telling him, go loose the prisoner, let the prisoner be loosed, you would say luesto, referring to the prisoner, let the prisoner be loosed. Or loose yourself, let the prisoner loose himself, I guess, but that doesn't make as much sense. Lueste would be talking to a group of people, be loosed. Like the jailer's going up to all the prisoners, he opens the door and he says, be loosed, lueste, talking to multiple people directly. And then this one is third person plural. So if you want all the prisoners to go and you're the jailer, you're talking to your assistant or your whatever prison guard, let the prisoners be loosed. Then you would say luestosan, let them be loosed. So talking about a third party, plural group of people that you're not directly talking to. Now, for middle only verbs like por you omai, remember they end with omai, those will take the same endings exactly as the middle passive in the present imperative. So it would be por you. If you want to tell someone to go and it's just one person, you say go. That's por you. If you want to tell somebody that other people should go, another person, just a singular third person, por uesto. And then por ueste would be talking directly to a large group of people or more than one people. Go would be to more than one people, por ueste. And then let the prisoners go, like talking to your guard, let the prisoners go, you would just say the prisoners por uestosan. Now let me just notice a few things about these forms. Notice how lueto becomes luesto, so that tau becomes a sigma theta. It's a little bit softer. Lueto, luesto. So talking to one of your guards and having the guard go tell another soldier to let the prisoners, to loose the prisoners, you would say, let the guard loose the prisoners. That would be lueto. And then if you're talking about let the prisoner be loosed, you would say luesto. So it's kind of slightly different depending on who's doing the loosing. The guard looses, the prisoners are loosed. And then ete becomes este. So again, the tau becomes sigma theta. So luete would be loose the prisoners, talking directly to your guards. Here, lueste would be talking to the prisoners. Be loosed, be loosed. Loose, be loosed. You can also use this as loose yourselves, which would also be the same form. And then finally, ettosan becomes esthosan. So again, the tau becomes the sigma theta. So this would be talking to a person about how you want your guards to loose the prisoners. You would say, let the guards luettosan. And then luesthosan is let the prisoners be loosed. All right, now it gets a little more complicated with the first aorist imperative, so I'm going to explain that in the future, but I just wanted to put the signs up here. Notice we just add sigmas, and we have these alphas instead of epsilons. We do have two different forms, a passive and a middle. So you have lutheti and luci, meaning loose and loose yourself. And then poiusi is basically adding the sigma and the same endings as you have. And you also have this transition from auto to ostho, but we'll talk about that coming up. All right, let's go ahead and read Matthew 10, verses 11 through 13. Eis hein dan pollen, komein, eis eilthete, exitasate tis en aute axias estin. Kake meinate, heos on ex elthete. Eis herchamenoi de eis tein oikian, aspa saste autein. Kai ean men he oikia axia, elthato he eirene humon ep autein. Eande me axia he eirene humon pros humas epistrapheto. All right, in these verses we have aorist imperatives. So in fact, they're all aorist imperatives, and we have one passive, 3 active, and 1 middle. So this is a good selection. So I put our little imperative cheat sheet up here again, and we'll compare how the present is actually quite simple. All you have to do to make it an aorist imperative, which is usually a quick type of command, like go to the door or open the window, that type of command. Whereas the present imperative generally is going to be a command that you would do all the time, like love your neighbor or stop at the stoplights, that kind of thing. Those are more general commands. Whereas something that's quick and something you want to be done now would be generally an aorist. Okay, there's always exceptions to these rules. But let's see, to go from imperative aorist, notice how you add a sigma to the stem, so lu becomes loose. And then you'll notice on is different, the becomes on, but all of the other ones, instead of eto, you have auto. Instead of ete, you have ate. Instead of etosan, you have autosan. So the epsilon becomes an alpha, which kind of makes sense because we have alpha at the beginning of aorist. That's how I remember it. Now with passive, I like to think of the theta as an indicator of passive. So that will help you here. So it's a slightly different form. So it's lutheti, lutheto, luthete, luthetosan. So instead of the sigma alpha, it becomes theta eta. So lusate becomes luthete. Lusatosan becomes luthetosan. And then for our middle, we do have a separate form for something that's like loose yourself, as opposed to be loosed, it's loose yourself. This would just be adding the sigma and then alpha iota. And then instead of auto, it becomes ostho. So lusato, lusostho. The difference between let him loose himself. And then lusate becomes lusaste. Loose, talking to a group of people, loose it, loose whatever. And this is loose yourselves. And then lusatosan becomes lusastosan. So this is let them loose and let them loose themselves. Of course, if you grew up in ancient Greece, these would become obvious to you, but right now it just is really hard. You just have to see it over and over before it starts to click, so don't worry if it's confusing. And again, we have the same endings for our middle-only verbs. So poiu adds the sigma and the I, so it's poiusai, and that would be go, like a quick go, poiusai. Whereas poiuu would be like go to the dentist once a year. Poiusai would be go now and get her. So, and then we have poiuestho becomes poiusastho. So the sigma and the alpha should clue you into this is aorist. So this poiuestho, let him go to the dentist every year, versus poiusastho, let him go now to buy some bread. And then we have poiuesthe becomes poiusasthe. So the difference between talking to a group of people, go, all of you go, in general to the dentist every year. And poryusaste is go now, all of you, to fight in the battle. And then poryuesthosan becomes poryusasthosan. So this would be let them go to the dentist every year. And this would be let them go into the battle. So that's kind of an example of how you would use these in a slightly different way. It's like imperatives, not so different, present versus aorist in terms of time, but more the type of command, a general command or something specific right now that you want somebody to do quickly. All right, so let's look at these examples. We have exetasate, comes from the verb exetazo. And notice this becomes aorist by adding the sigma to the zeta. And the zeta followed by the sigma, a zeta sigma, simply becomes sigma. So you don't have to keep the zeta there when you add a sigma to it. It just basically becomes a sigma. So zeta plus sigma is just a sigma. And then you have ate. So that follows perfectly with our lusate, exetasate. Here we have menate, comes from the word meno, which means I stay or I abide or I remain. This is what's called a liquid verb, and I'll point these out as we come across them. It's liquid because the stem ends with a liquid vowel, of which nu is one of them. So nu combined with sigma was like a no-no for the ancient Greeks. They just didn't like it. Mensa, for example. Mensa sounds weird to them. So you would never do mensate, you would do menate. The sigma just wouldn't be there, but you still have the alpha. And another thing about these verbs is often they'll have a little change from the epsilon to epsilon iota. So menate, meno, menate. All right, and then for a present imperative, you would have menete. The epsilon changes to the alpha when you're looking at the aorist imperative. And then we have aspasaste, comes from aspazomai, it means I welcome or I greet. So aspas, the zeta combines with the sigma to just be a sigma, just like we had here. So we don't have to have the zeta at all. In fact, that would it kind of would ruin the sound of it with the sigma there. You want to make sure that's clear that you're in the aorist. So it's not zeta sigma, the zeta goes away, it just becomes the single sigma. And then aste. So here we have lusaste is greet. This is aspazomai, which is a middle only verb, so we're going to use saste, the second person plural. Aspasaste. Greet them in the house, greet them. And then here we have elthato, which comes from erchomai. And you've probably noticed there's a lot of elf forms from erchomai. Instead of erch, in the aorist, you become elth. It's called a second aorist. It kind of has a strange stem change. So elthato. And again, you don't have a sigma. You actually are going to have elthato. Let your peace come. Notice this is third person singular, referring to your peace, he eirene humon. So, let the peace of you come upon that house, elthato. And then down here, it's the opposite. If they reject you, let the peace of you return. This comes from the verb epistrepho, which is a form of strepho with the epi prefix, which means upon. So turn upon or return. All right, let's go ahead and read our last two verses. Matthew 10, verses 14 and 15. Kai hasan me dexetai humas me de acuse tous lagus humon exerchamenoi exo tes oikias tes paleos ekenes ektinaxate tan kanyortan ton padon humon amen lego humin anektateron estai ge sadamon kai gamaron en hemera kriseos te pale ekene. All right, so some really great advice here on what to do when people reject you. So, and whoever will not receive you or won't hear your words, go out of that house or city and shake off the dust of your feet. Truly I say to you, more tolerable, notice this ateran for a comparative, it will be for the lands of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment. Jesus has some strong words for the people who reject Christians, who come to share the good news with them about the coming of the kingdom of the heavens. All right, so let's take a look at this one noun here, ton padon. This is another third declension noun. It is the foot, of the feet. Shake the dust of your feet off of you. So ha pous. Pous is the foot. Tu padas. So podiatrist comes from this form. To padi, ton pada, hoi pades, ton padon, tois pasin, tus padas. All right, so here we have shake off the dust of your feet. So that's basically like, don't even let the dust of their city remain on you. So padon is your feet. Ton padon humon. All right, now let's review some personal pronouns we see here. So, and whoever, has, this is a relative pronoun. We won't talk about that now, but whoever, so this is usually on is combined. It's a particle that indicates something that's like whoever or whatever or wherever, will not receive you. May, and this is a subjunctive verb. We'll talk about subjunctive verbs in the future, but this is a hypothetical. If whoever doesn't receive you, if this person may not receive you in the future, that's why it's a subjunctive. You. So here, you is the accusative. It's the direct object of to receive. So personal pronoun you, accusative, second person plural. So we're going to have it over here. You, plural, is humas. Here we are. Finally, I found it. So it's second person, both masculine and feminine for you. And you're not going to have neuter because generally you is talking about a person. So accusative, humas. And then over here we have humon, your words, just like we saw humon with padon. Your words is here, genitive plural. Tous lagus humon. This is, by the way, regular second declension noun. That's masculine, the word. Ta lagos. And then we have over here humon, again, ton padon humon. That's right here. And finally, humin, I say to you. This is Jesus saying, truly, amen, lego humin. You're going to get used to hearing amen, lego humin. You probably heard that enough in the Beatitudes and from the Sermon on the Mount. Not just the Beatitudes, the entire Sermon on the Mount. So, amen, lego humin, to you. So that's your dative plural. So these are all examples of the second person. Let's go ahead and read these just so you remember. Ego, emu or mu, emoi or moi, eme or me, hemes, hemon, hemin, hemas. Then we have su, soy or so, se, humes, humon, humin, humas. And now we have, for the third person, we have masculine, feminine, and neuter. So we have 3 columns here. Autas, aute, auta. Autu, autes, autu. Auto, aute, auto. Auton, autain, auta. Autoi, autai, auta. Auton, auton, auton. Autois, autais, autois. Autus, autas, auta. All right, so I highlighted in the same colors the similar forms. You should be used to it by now. Sometimes your third person feminine plural is different, but here it's not. And finally, we have our demonstrative pronouns. In these verbs, so having gone forth out of the house or out of the city, that. So that city that had the people that rejected you, that won't receive you or listen to your words. Tes paleos ekenes. This is what's called a far demonstrative pronoun. So in English, we would say that, whereas a near demonstrative pronoun would be this. And again, than for that city. So it would be better in the judgment day for Sodom and Gomorrah then for that city. So here we have dative because it's to or for, and it's akene. So a also means, by the way, than. It can also mean or, but that city. So te pale akene, that city, for that city. All right, so let's look at the near demonstrative pronouns first. Those are over here. Hutas, haute, tuta, or toot before a vowel. Tutu, tautes, tutu. Tuto, taute, tuto. Tuton, tautain, tuta, or toot. Kutoi, hautai, tauta. Tuton, tutone, tutone. Tutois, tautais, tutois. Tutus, tautas, tauta. All right, so that's for this. In English, you say this or these. Now, the far demonstrative pronouns, which I guess I should have put those second because I usually think of the near ones first and then the far ones second, but here we have them first, is what we've seen here with akenos. Akenos, akene, akena. Akenu, akenes, akenu. Akeno, akene, akeno. Akenon, akenane, akena. Akenoi, akenai, akena. Akenon, akenon, akenon. Akenois, akenais, akenois. Akenus, akenas, akena. So these all follow very, very closely the first and second declensions. First declension for the feminine and the second declension for the masculine neuters. So those should be fairly, you should see that those are kind of predictable. Thank you so much for joining us for lesson 23. As always, keep up the good work. This is not easy, but trust me, as you read more and more of the New Testament, you will be blessed and it will become more easy. You will also start recognizing these forms more often. And I really think this is the best way to learn Greek. It's time consuming, but you're reading the New Testament as you do it. So thank you so much for joining me. Spread the word. Please like this video if it was helpful. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Goodbye.